Hello. Not only that today, 400 years ago, was born the great Italian architect Guarino Guarini, but also on the 17th of January, but in 1925, only next year, there will be the centennial of Gunnar Birkerts, a very interesting, I would say, North American architect. Let's read a little bit about him. He was born, as you can see, on January 17th, 1925, was a Latvian American architect who, for the most of his career, was based in the metropolitan area of Detroit, Michigan. Some of his notable designs include the Corning Museum of Glass and the Corning Fire Station in Corning, New York, Market Plaza in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art in Kansas City, Missouri, and the US Embassy in Caracas, Venezuela. In 2014, so 3 years before he died, the National Library at Latvia in Riga was completed to his design. Let me just try to read here. I have a problem with something is covering, and this exasperates me. The first line. Birkerts was born and raised in Latvia, but escaped ahead of the advancing Soviet army towards the end of the Second World War. He graduated from the Technische Hochschule in Stuttgart in Germany in 1949. He acknowledged being influenced by Scandinavian tradition and the Finnish architect Alvar Aalto. Birkerts immigrated to the United States that year and worked initially for Perkins and Will, an important architecture firm in Chicago. He moved to the Detroit area in the early 1950s, where he worked for Eero Saarinen and was chief designer for Minoru Yamasaki. We know the author of the World Trade Center that was brought down by the tragedy in 2001, before opening his own office in the city's suburbs. Birkerts also maintained an architectural office in Wellesley, Massachusetts. He initially practiced in the partnership Birkerts and Straub. In 1963, he set up Gunnar Birkerts and Associates in Birmingham, Michigan. So he had a very successful career. This was the man, I would say, a handsome, Scandinavian. And let's see his works. A vital man who had something to say about architecture, and he said it in various forms. The Corning Fire Station in Corning, New York, triangular plan, a vast building from the, at the first sight, you might not realize the perfect triangle, equilateral triangle that the plan is. A simple building, you say, and it is red because it is a fire station. So you have the triangle, that triangle of flames, you could say, and then you have the color of flames of fire, which is red. So it's a building which aesthetically, symbolically is correct, if we are to employ this word, correct. A large fire station built by this architect was not indifferent to architectural expression. And you can see here, it's to be a fireman, you need courage, you need to, even self-sacrifice yourself. It's an activity that has a certain symbolism, and maybe the building expresses it to an extent, at least. Not bad. It shows you can do good architecture for, very secular functions, if we are to call a fire station a secular building. Being that it is about fire, maybe the word secular is not totally the most adequate. There are other architects who built interesting fire stations. Fire inspires, redness inspires. The Corning Museum of Glass in Corning, New York, very different building from the previous one, a Museum of Glass. Gunnar Birkerts. Latvian, born and raised in Latvia, but building in the United States. And at the end of his life, the great library that he built in Latvia. We are going to see it at the end of the presentation. But now we'll see some images with the Museum of Glass. It's perhaps, but it's not such an easy building as it might appear at the first sight. The Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art in Kansas City in Missouri. The artwork is not his, but the building is. Very different, of course, from the buildings of Guarino Guarini, who was also born on the 17th of January, but 300 years earlier than Gunnar Birkerts. Here we see the famous spider by Louis Bourgeois, great artist. This or a similar spider was planted also in front of the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao and many other places. You can see here and there, some hints towards that influence that was mentioned in the text that we read, that he admired Alvarado, and there was some influence, but it's still the architecture of Gunnar Birkerts is specifically his, and it is a North American architecture with some influence coming from Northern Europe. The concern with the roof is present here too, differently from what we saw in the case of Guarino Guarini, but it is still this transition between the earth and the sky that the roof is its business to express in a certain form. Expressing myself in a banal way, I would say that the roof is the coiffure of the building, and it has to have a certain character. It has to communicate a certain awareness about the otherness of the above. And here we see a certain, if not tumultuousness, but the sculpturalness of this transition from the earth towards the sky is illustrated in the case of Gunnar Birkerts as well. I say as well, if one thinks of the great domes of Guarino Guarini. And it seems this building is, seductive even for the newly married. Who, I mean, yes, maybe we should all aspire towards doing an architecture just like the, Salk Institute by Louis Kahn, where also, newlywed take pictures of themselves. Maybe this could be a definition of a good architecture, or maybe not, because sometimes the taste of people is questionable. But in an ideal world, you say a good building is a building where a newlywed love to take pictures of themselves, like here, inside the museum built by Gunnar Birkerts. It's not a chapel, it's not a church, it's a museum. Well, for some people with some means, because not everybody, I imagine, is capable of paying for a ceremony taking place inside the museum. Anyway, the sacrality of marriage and the sacrality, no, it's no sacrality. Here it's a museum, but still, you see that the sharpness of the triangle pointing upwards and the light coming from the left, and there is expression, in other words. The Calvary Baptist Church. So now we go from a secular building to a sacred building, a Baptist church. I don't know. I mean, I would accept it and maybe even embrace it or upload it. I'm not so sure about that door there in the corner, although it's interesting that the entrance into the church happens, in the least tall part of the building. But there are here some hints towards that fatal movement in architecture that we call postmodernism. Otherwise, the building, if you don't see that entrance, which is maybe a little bit excessively domesticated, it is impressive somehow with its scale and its, you know, robust geometry. And the reflections, the shadows of the big tree on the sloping surfaces of the building could create some some drama, aesthetical drama. It has a certain purity. It's just that, in my opinion, that entrance is a little bit too connected with what I would call domesticity. Maybe it was his intention. You know, you enter through the least glorious part of the building, and the unknown, the majesty of the unknown is hidden on the left side of the building, as we see it in this picture. St. Peter's Lutheran Church, another church, very different church. This is actually, I'm a little bit uneasy here because Saarinen built one very similar, and I wonder if it's not the same one. And I apologize for my lack of certitude. But I included this one in this presentation, so I think it belongs to Gunnar Birkerts. But as I said, there is one by Eero Saarinen very similar to this one. Well, he worked for Eero Saarinen. But we see, if we compare now with the brickworks of Guarino Guarini, we see a different architect, a different time, no modern times. The surface, yes, it is curved, but it is still, kind of flat, meaning, there is that weaving that we noticed in the works, great works of Guarino Guarini in Turin, is not present here. That weaving is not, it doesn't have the complexity and the lyricism of what Guarino Guarini did. But brick still remains a very, very potent and sensitive materials in the hands of those who feel it, like the hands of Frank Lloyd Wright, who said, we remember that, give me a brick and I will transform it in its equivalent in gold. That's what Frank Lloyd Wright said. So this is another church by Gunnar Birkerts. Now, Cross of Christ Church. This building does show, some echoes a little bit from, or maybe not so a little bit, especially in the tall parts of the building, the influence of Alvarado. I'm not sure about that cross, rhetorically, maybe he was asked to do so. I think a great church, I mean, as a building, doesn't need necessarily the cross. You make it in such a way that it evokes the cross without showing it, without illustrating it. Well, that cross there on the top of the building looks like an afterthought, and it's very possible that the architect didn't plan it there. It was required in the end. It's triumphally somehow. It's not too large, but it could have been more subtly incorporated somehow into the building than that rhetorical, too explicit presence there at the top, I think. Now we look at a very, very different building, and it's a famous building. It was published at its time copiously, the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with a very interesting structure. So from God to the world of money, a bank. Banks experimented sometimes architecturally because, in a way, the bank replaced the church. And, that's where the power is in capitalism. Look at the building. It's not just a decoration, that facade. It illustrates rigorously how the structure works. and the structure became ornamental, and that's the case often with a good architecture. The structure becomes ornament, and ornament becomes structure. It is one of the most remarkable banks, actually. This one built by Gunnar Birkerts in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I said this before, and I venture to say it again. Very often, if not always, good buildings are good, meaning aesthetically, even architecturally, at any point during the construction. It doesn't matter when you take a picture of the building site at the beginning or at the end when the building is completed, something of the spirit of the conception of the building is there, is present. The nobility of the spirit is present at any stage of the development of the building. Sometimes, the beauty of a conception is hidden at the end. That's why I arrived at the conclusion that often buildings are more interesting during the construction, in the process of being built, than the final result, because the final result often hides. This doesn't happen, of course, in the works like we just saw of Guarino Guarini, but in contemporary works, in modern works, at the end, the building becomes too sleek, too clean. It doesn't communicate the complexity, the fragmentations, the struggles, the efforts of erecting the building. At the end, you have no knowledge of what meant to build the building. Here, though, between this and this, there is a continuity of even of aesthetical expression. Is this better than this? Aesthetically, maybe not, or for those with artistic concerns, but in terms of a functional building, of course, this is a building that has an interior that is comfortable, that is air conditioned, and so on. Gunnar Birkerts, 9th Federal Reserve Bank, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Try to imagine this building in any European city of that time or even the present. I mean, in the United States, there are remarkable buildings that would create glory for any city in the world, but where they are, maybe they become sometimes even unnoticed. The specialist knows about them, but they don't animate the city as maybe they should in terms of architectonic quality. Look at the intricacies of the structure. It's beautiful, and also the final image is powerful. It's maybe too powerful. Parabolic cable structure, Federal Reserve Bank, Minneapolis. Gunnar Birkerts and Associates, and then we see there's some other names, maybe the engineers. 1998. University Reformed Church, Ann Arbor. This is the 4th church by Gunnar Birkerts. This building I love. I love because you see here there is no cross. There is no, I'm not against the cross, quite the opposite. I have great affection for the cross. But actually there is a cross. But this is what was missing in the previous building. Here the cross is subdued, although its scale is much larger, but is abstracted and it is incorporated into the mystery of the whole building. So it is there, and it is not there. It is and it isn't, and I like this very much. It is not ostentatious, and it's in a way even more subtle than in that famous Chapel of Light by Tadao Ando. I like this building very much. In fact, I regret now I don't have. I should have. I feel inspired to contemplate it more, because when you look at this building, you might have a hint that might be some kind of a building serving otherness, the kind the house of God should be. But you are not sure. It could even be. It's there is a certain ambiguity here. If you look at this building, what is it? A temple, or even some kind of an architectonic exercise for some kind of a utilitarian structure? It has a monumentality, but it's abstracted, and it's mysterious, and I think architecture working for a sacred program should aspire towards something like this. What does it mean, that division? Because you see it's cut in the center, and the cross insinuates itself in the facade of the building more through absence in a way than through presence. So the presence of absence, this is something worth discussing about. It's a temple, it's a church, it serves Christianity because it is a church, but it could be also a temple. No, I would venture even adventurously to say pagan temple. Very interesting work. Gunnar Birkerts. Now, I don't know, maybe the main facade, I mean, what we see towards the street was meant to be painted, maybe not, but it is an intriguing building. I like its silence. It has a dignity which is beyond the words, and it's silent. It's silent. Its silence is inspiring and provocative at the same time. And again, the subtlety of the inclusion, the insertion of the cross here. There is a cross, but it's subtly incorporated into this facade towards the street. I would say it's a very good building by Gunnar Birkerts. And now we arrive at his swan song, major work by Gunnar Birkerts, the National Library of Latvia. So this Latvian architect, who became an Latvian-American architect, is returning to his roots and builds an excellent building for a library, a large library, the Library of Latvia in Riga. Here he is lecturing on the building, and this is the building. Not bad. After all, what is a library? It is a container of books, but it's also a building that expresses the longing for knowledge of man. And it's like the ship, it's a ship towards knowledge near the water. It's sailing animated by the spirit of man. And this architect, I think, did a great job to build the National Library of Latvia in this way. A small country, but smallness does not preclude quality. He was no doubt a very good architect, Gunnar Birkerts. A serious, intense, convincing, still experimenting. This is a unique library. There is an ascensional movement here too, you know, like in that church that John Woodson built in Copenhagen. You know, you almost feel the need for the presence of the organ to hear Bach, to hear organ music. It's a library, but the connection between knowledge and faith is an intimate one. You know, in the Middle Ages, there was always a learning center associated with the church, with the cathedral. In itself, the quest for knowledge is not so, you know, foreign to an aspiration that has, you know, a longing for the above or for God. Maybe I don't know if Gunnar Birkerts would have agreed to sign his working drawings with the same three letters that Johann Sebastian Bach and Ingmar Bergman, the great Swedish film director, signed their, you know, papers. You know, the musical sheets in the case of Bach and the screenplays of the films of Ingmar Bergman. S D G, Soli Deo Gloria, to God alone glory. But I imagine, I mean, we saw 4 churches built by Gunnar Birkerts, and now we see a library. It's very possible that he was animated, that his soul was animated for what we call a certain quest for God. Here is the expression, the architectonic expression for a quest for knowledge. But maybe the quest for knowledge is not so far removed from what we might call the quest for God. And this could have been, maybe with some changes or maybe not, a church. But it's the church of learning, a library, the National Library. The interior is a little bit mundane, it's true, there is a level of mundanity, but well kept under control because it is a serious building by a serious architect. And if human beings were present in these pictures, it's possible that, you know, the pictures themselves would have been more evocative and more compelling. But even so, it is an excellent building by this appreciable Latvian American architect, Gunnar Asplund. Gunnar, not Asplund. I keep saying Gunnar Asplund. No, Gunnar Birkerts. Gunnar Asplund was a great Swedish architect who in his turn inspired Alvar Aalto, who in his turn inspired Gunnar Birkerts. And I love the sketch by Gunnar Birkerts as well. Obviously, he started with the immeasurable, as Lewis Kahn required from a good building. Because this sketch, this incipient, this sketch from the beginning shows you know, the aspiration towards the metaphysical that then became physical in the act of erecting the library. Thank you, and happy birthday, Gunnar Birkerts.